have to have your dreams, but you got to do what you're doing. You got to plod along. You got to take it one step at a time and keep your head down and don't lose sight of what you really want.
Sally Field was born on November 6, 1946 in Pasadena, California, but from the very beginning her life was marked by emotional distance, not comfort. Her mother, Margaret Field, was a working actress under Paramount Pictures. Her beauty got her roles, but her heart was often elsewhere. Sally's father, Richard Dryden Field, was a World War II veteran, respected for his service but frequently absent from home. By the time Sally turned 4, her parents divorced. That decision shattered what little sense of family she had. What followed next would shape Sally's entire life. Her mother quickly remarried a man named Jock Mahoney. To the outside world, Jock was charming. He was a well-known stuntman, tall, athletic, and always smiling. But what no one saw was the way he changed behind closed doors. Sally would later describe those early years as filled with confusion and fear. Jock's attention toward her wasn't just unsettling, it crossed the line in ways no child should ever endure. As Sally grew older, the pressure of keeping secrets weighed on her. She was only 13 when she realised fully what had been taken from her. But the deepest wound didn't come from him. It came from her mother, who never asked questions, never looked closely, and never stepped in to stop it. The silence in that house wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Sally would later say that she felt invisible, like a child screaming on the inside while no one was listening. This sense of being ignored became part of her identity. And yet, in the middle of that pain, something unexpected happened. She discovered acting, not as a career dream, but as a way to survive. Watching her mother on film sets, she saw characters say things she was never allowed to say. When she got to high school, drama class became her safe zone. Pretending to be someone else was the only way she could feel like herself. That coping mechanism turned into something bigger. At a party in the early 1960s, a talent scout noticed her. It was a simple moment, a chance encounter, but it would change her future. He invited her to audition for Columbia Studios. For a girl who had spent years trying to disappear, that moment felt like the world was finally looking straight at her and not turning away. But Sally's past didn't just vanish. At age 17, she faced something life-altering. An unplanned pregnancy. It happened after a brief and confusing encounter at a graduation party. She didn't know what love felt like. She barely knew what safety felt like. And when she needed support the most, the people around her failed her, again. Instead of comfort, she got control. Her stepfather Jock took over everything. He arranged for her to be sent to a clinic across the border in Tijuana, Mexico. There was no conversation, no comfort, no one explaining what was happening. Just a scared teenage girl, alone in a foreign country, waking up to a new level of emotional emptiness. Her mother didn't go with her. In fact, her mother didn't even show up. That absence wasn't just hurtful, it was devastating. Sally didn't just walk away from that moment with physical pain. She walked away with a growing belief that she didn't matter, that when things got hard, people would simply look away. But she wasn't broken. Not completely. What could have destroyed her instead added to the fire building inside. After that traumatic chapter in her teenage years, Sally Field could have disappeared. Many would have crumbled under that kind of pressure, abuse, abandonment, and the weight of secrets. But instead, she began to carve out a new path, even if it wasn't perfect. At just 18 years old, in 1965, Sally landed her first major role, the lead in Gidget, a TV show about a cheerful surfer girl. The role made her an instant fan favourite, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen, not for her pain, but for her presence. But here's where the illusion started to build. The industry praised her for her bubbly charm, her sweet smile, her lightness. What they didn't see, or chose not to, was how hollow that praise felt. They were applauding a version of her that didn't exist. Gidget wasn't Sally, she was a mask. And while the show brought her recognition, it also boxed her in. Hollywood had decided what kind of woman Sally Field was going to be, and it wasn't one with depth, pain, or power. 2 years later, in 1967, she landed another leading role, this time as Sister Bertrille in The Flying Nun. It became a cultural hit and made her a household name, but again, it wasn't real. In interviews years later, Sally admitted she felt like she was being erased by the roles she played. She was known for wearing a nun's habit and soaring through the air, but behind the scenes, she felt stuck to the ground, trapped by other people's expectations. So she made a move most young actresses would never dare. She walked away. At the height of her television fame, she started turning down offers. From 1968 to 1971, Sally vanished from TV screens. Instead of chasing more sitcom roles, she enrolled at the Actors Studio, studying method acting under Lee Strasberg. It was intense, emotional work. It meant digging into her past, confronting pain she'd spent years trying to bury, and translating that into every breath she took on stage. She would later say that acting saved her life, not the kind of acting that came with applause, but the kind that forced her to face who she really was. And it wasn't easy. Many nights she doubted herself. Critics and casting agents whispered that she'd already peaked. Some even said she'd been lucky to get anything at all. But Sally refused to go back to playing characters who didn't feel real. She knew she had more to give, even if no one believed it yet. Everything changed in 1976. That year, she was cast in the TV movie Sybil, the story of a woman living with multiple personalities after surviving childhood abuse. It was a brutal role, emotionally demanding and psychologically complex. Sally played 13 different versions of the same woman, each with its own voice, personality, and trauma. She pulled from her own experiences, pouring years of pain into every scene. The result was unforgettable. Sybil shocked audiences and critics. It earned Sally her first Emmy Award and redefined her image overnight. No longer just the girl who wore a habit and smiled on cue, she was now seen as a serious actress with depth, range, and the kind of emotional intelligence few could match. This wasn't just a career milestone, it was a personal victory. Sally had proven to herself that she was more than the roles they gave her, that she could tell real stories, hold space for real pain, and command attention without faking it. But that win didn't erase the struggles she had already faced. It simply marked a turning point, a moment when she finally felt like she was on the right path. Even with Sybil under her belt and an Emmy in her hand, Sally Field's climb wasn't smooth. Hollywood still saw her as a TV actress, not someone who could carry a film, and Sally knew that if she wanted lasting respect, she had to break that perception completely. The late 1970s would test her patience, her confidence, and her ability to hold her ground in an industry that didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to smile and play along. This is when her boldest career decision paid off. In 1979, Sally landed the role of Norma Ray, a Southern textile worker who leads a union uprising. The film was based on a true story, and it demanded more than just acting skill. It called for grit, presence, and raw emotional power. Sally threw herself into the character. She studied union activism, changed her speech patterns, and captured every ounce of the working-class woman's strength. What she delivered stunned everyone. Her performance in Norma Ray wasn't just good, it was groundbreaking. Audiences connected with it instantly. Critics called it her best work yet. And at the 1980 Academy Awards, Sally Field stood on stage holding her first Oscar for Best Actress. But even that golden statue didn't erase the years of being underestimated. She was proud, of course, but the moment came with complicated feelings. For so long, she'd been told she wasn't enough. Too soft, too smiley, too TV. Now she had proved them wrong, but the road to get there had been long, lonely, and filled with people trying to tell her who she should be. In interviews, Sally often said the win felt more like a battle scar than a celebration. Just 5 years later, in 1984, she did it again. This time, she starred in Places in the Heart, playing a widowed mother struggling to save her farm during the Great Depression. It was a role that demanded a different kind of strength, quiet, enduring, maternal. She studied the rural lifestyle, lived it, and brought every hardship to life on screen, and once again, it paid off. Sally won her second Oscar for Best Actress. Her acceptance speech became iconic. Standing on stage, she said, "You like me, right now you like me." People joked about the line for years, but it wasn't a flub, it was a release. A raw, honest moment from someone who had spent her whole career fighting to be taken seriously. The world might have laughed, but Sally had earned that microphone, and she didn't stop there. From the late 1980s into the early 90s, she took on role after role that added layers to her legacy. In Steel Magnolias, 1989, she played a grieving mother with heartbreaking realism. In Mrs. Doubtfire, 1993, she was the strong ex-wife trying to hold her family together with grace. And in Forrest Gump, 1994, she delivered one of the most touching performances of her career as Forrest's loving, resilient mother. Each part reflected something real. These weren't just characters, they were extensions of her own experiences: grief, frustration, resilience, and quiet strength. She brought them to life not by pretending, but by pulling from her own history. Her pain, her healing, and her survival became the emotional fuel for every performance. Still, the fight never truly ended. Even as a two-time Oscar winner, she found herself up against an industry that often discarded women after a certain age. Complex roles became harder to find. Doors didn't always open as easily as they did for her male peers. But Sally pushed through, just like she always had. She chose roles with meaning. And if they weren't offered, she waited instead of settling. While Sally Field was building a powerful career on screen, her personal life was unfolding with just as much drama, only it didn't come with scripts or safety nets. Behind the fame, she was navigating love, motherhood, and heartbreak with a quiet determination few ever saw. Her first marriage came in 1968, when she was just 22 years old. She married Stephen Craig, her high school sweetheart, hoping to build a life of stability and peace far away from the chaos of Hollywood. But even that fresh start came with cracks. Stephen was supportive in the beginning, and together they had two sons, Peter in 1969 and Eli in 1972. Sally adored motherhood. Her boys gave her purpose beyond the camera, but the emotional distance that had haunted her childhood slowly crept into her marriage. Stephen's ambitions led him in one direction, while Sally's career kept pulling her in another. Over time, they stopped connecting. She described herself as disappearing in plain sight, doing everything she could to hold the family together while quietly feeling more alone than ever. By 1975, the marriage ended. It wasn't scandalous or messy, it was just empty. Sally was only 29, a single mother with two kids, still pushing uphill in her career. But even after the divorce, she held tight to her role as a mother. In many ways, that role grounded her more than any job ever could. Then came the relationship that would define an entire chapter of her life, Burt Reynolds. They met in 1977 on the set of Smokey and the Bandit. The chemistry was instant. Within days, they were together. To the outside world, they were Hollywood's golden couple, her radiant charm, his rugged charisma. But the reality was far more painful than it appeared. Burt could be loving and magnetic one moment, then dismissive and controlling the next. He questioned her talent, made her doubt her instincts, and often undermined her success. When Sally was offered the role in Norma Ray, the very role that would win her an Oscar, Burt told her she wasn't good enough for it. He didn't want her to take the part, and when she did anyway, he refused to go with her to the Oscars in 1980. That moment still lingers. Sally walked the red carpet alone, accepted the award alone, and stood in front of the world smiling through pain. She once said, "I was always trying to prove I was enough for him." For 5 years, she stayed in a relationship that chipped away at her confidence. In her memoir, In Pieces, she admitted Burt belittled her, controlled her, and made her feel small. Eventually, she had to make a choice. In 1982, Sally walked away, not because she stopped loving him, but because she finally chose to love herself more. It was a painful ending. They didn't speak for nearly 3 decades after the breakup. No calls, no letters, nothing. But in his final years, Burt reached out. His voice, worn with age, carried the words she had once begged to hear. "You were the love of my life." But it was too late. Sally had already let go. She mourned not just the man, but the time lost, the love wasted, and the wounds that never had to happen. She had survived again, this time the slow heartbreak of loving someone who couldn't love her back the right way. After the heartbreak with Burt Reynolds, Sally Field entered a new stage of her life, one that was quieter, more grounded, and focused on healing. In 1984, she married again, this time to film producer Alan Greisman. On the surface, the relationship seemed different from her past. Alan wasn't a Hollywood heartthrob or a household name. He was calm, thoughtful, and respected Sally's independence. For a while, it felt like she had finally found the kind of steady partnership she'd always hoped for. But even peaceful beginnings can come with invisible cracks. In 1987, the couple welcomed their son, Sam. Sally was 40 years old at the time, and Sam's arrival brought her a sense of joy she hadn't felt in years. As with her older sons, motherhood grounded her again. She often described her boys as her foundation, her reason for getting up each morning when the world felt overwhelming. But as time passed, the emotional distance that had fractured her first marriage began to show up again. There was no scandal this time, no public collapse, just two people slowly drifting apart. Sally once said that with Alan, the relationship became more like a quiet room where no one was talking. She started to feel the same sense of invisibility she had fought her whole life to escape. So in 1994, after a decade of trying to hold things together, Sally chose to walk away. But this time, the decision came from strength, not fear. She was no longer trying to prove her worth or save something broken. She was protecting her peace. She later joked in interviews, "I've never been great at picking husbands." The humour was real, but it also masked the ache of another closed chapter. Despite the divorce, Sally's relationship with her children stayed strong, and it became even more meaningful over time. When her youngest son, Sam, came out as gay, Sally embraced him fully. There was no hesitation, no judgment. In fact, it pulled them closer. Sally became a vocal advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, often using her platform to speak out on issues of equality and identity. In 2012, she accepted the Human Rights Campaign's Ally for Equality Award with a speech that moved many to tears. That chapter of her life wasn't just about motherhood, it was about transformation. Sally was no longer playing the roles others wrote for her, on screen or in life. She had become the author of her own story, and while she was no stranger to pain, she finally began to find peace in places she once feared: solitude, aging, and even stillness. In those years, her career also took a surprising and powerful turn. In 2012, at age 66, Sally starred as Mary Todd Lincoln in Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. The role was a challenge. She gained weight, buried herself in historical research, and fought to give a layered, honest portrayal of a woman history often misunderstood. Critics praised her performance, and she earned yet another Academy Award nomination. But it wasn't about trophies anymore. By that point in her life, Sally Field had nothing left to prove. The girl who once studied lines to escape trauma was now a woman using her art to confront it, honour it, and rise above it. She had lived enough to know that real strength comes not from pretending everything is okay, but from surviving everything that wasn't. By the time Sally Field entered her 70s, she had already endured more than most people ever will. But life still had one more terrifying chapter waiting for her, a moment that would nearly take everything away. It happened on October 29th, 1988, when she was 42 years old. Sally and 3 family members were boarding a private jet in Aspen, Colorado. The day started like any other. Crisp mountain air, quiet conversation, maybe even a few thoughts about the week ahead. Then, without warning, disaster struck. Just seconds after takeoff, the engines of the plane faltered. There was a jolt, a terrifying pause, and then gravity took over. The jet crashed into another parked aircraft on the runway. It was chaos, screeching metal, shattered glass, thick smoke. Sally later recalled the sound of her own voice screaming, not even recognizing it as hers. She could feel the seatbelt crushing her chest, her pulse thundering in her ears. Somehow, all 4 of them survived. They walked away with only minor physical injuries, but the emotional aftermath was enormous. In the days and weeks that followed, the crash haunted her. She couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind. The angle of the wing before it dipped, the engine's final gasp, the frantic seconds before impact. She didn't talk about it much. Publicly, she brushed it off. She didn't want the crash to define her or turn into a headline. But privately, it changed everything. The experience rewired her priorities. For someone who had already lived through trauma, it was a shocking reminder of just how fragile life really is. She later said, "I thought, this is it. This is how my story ends, but it didn't." And surviving what felt like the end gave her a deeper appreciation for what came after. In the years following the crash, Sally became noticeably more intentional with her time. She stopped chasing roles that didn't matter to her. She spent more mornings in the garden, more afternoons with her kids, more nights watching old movies instead of going to events. There was no more proving, no more pleasing, just living. But even in this slower season of life, she didn't stop showing up when it mattered. In 2019, she was arrested during a climate change protest in Washington, D.C., standing side by side with her longtime friend Jane Fonda. It wasn't for publicity, it was for conviction. Sally knew how to use her voice, and she wasn't afraid to put her body on the line for a cause she believed in. That same courage showed up in her health journey too. In 2005, she was diagnosed with osteoporosis, a disease that silently weakens the bones. It was a wake-up call. She had spent her whole life enduring invisible pain, and now her body was telling her she couldn't ignore it anymore. So she launched the Rally with Sally campaign to spread awareness about bone health and early screening. Some people criticised the campaign for its corporate sponsorships, but Sally didn't flinch. She knew the reality. Millions of women suffer from the condition without knowing it until it's too late. If she could help even a few people by speaking out, it was worth it. She adjusted her diet, embraced low-impact workouts like yoga, and learned how to manage the stiffness that met her each morning. She didn't try to reverse time, she worked with it. Wellness for Sally wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. She wasn't chasing youth anymore, she was embracing reality, with grace, patience, and the same resilience that had carried her through everything else. In her later years, Sally Field quietly stepped away from the Hollywood spotlight, but not from life. She didn't need the camera anymore. What she wanted, finally, was peace. And she found it in Pacific Palisades, California, where she settled into a modest 2,800 square foot home overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's not a mansion, not a celebrity showpiece. It's a sanctuary, a place built for reflection, for calm mornings and slow evenings. Every corner of her home tells a story. There are no velvet ropes or red carpets. Instead, there are family photographs, worn-out books, and the sound of grandkids laughing in the background. Her daily routine is simple. She tends to her garden, drinks tea on the deck, and watches the sun melt into the ocean. The roar of applause has faded into memory, replaced by something deeper, stillness. Despite an estimated net worth of $50 million, Sally has always chosen simplicity. Her car is a hybrid Lexus RX 450h, not flashy, just reliable. Her diet is mostly plant-based. Her workouts are gentle and mindful, built around yoga and walks, not vanity. She said that aging gracefully isn't about fighting the clock, it's about learning to live with it. Her connection with her sons remains the heart of her world. Peter, Eli, and Sam are not just her children, they are her anchors. Her relationship with Sam, in particular, has shown the world what unconditional love looks like. When he came out as gay, Sally stood beside him proudly, not just as a mother, but as an advocate. She's since become one of the most respected voices for LGBTQ+ equality, not because she set out to be an activist, but because she knows what it feels like to be judged, silenced, and pushed aside. In 2012, when she accepted the Ally for Equality award, her speech wasn't rehearsed, it was raw. She talked about the courage it takes to live openly, to love without apology. It was another moment where Sally didn't play a role, she just spoke the truth. But even advocacy has its limits when the body begins to speak louder than the voice. Over the years, the effects of osteoporosis have slowed her down. Some days are harder than others. Mornings come with stiffness, sometimes pain. But Sally doesn't complain. She moves slower, but with intention. She chooses her moments carefully. You won't see her at every Hollywood gala or red carpet event. You'll find her kneeling in the dirt with her grandchildren, planting flowers or laughing over a board game. Her refrigerator isn't lined with movie posters. It's covered in crayon drawings and family photos. Her nights are quiet, filled with old films, not ones she starred in, but the classics she once watched as a girl, the same girl who longed for love, safety, and someone to listen. And in many ways, that girl finally got what she needed, not from fame or fans or even lovers, but from the life she built with her own hands, one choice at a time. Sally Field never set out to be a symbol. She wanted to act, to survive, and maybe, if the stars aligned, to be taken seriously. But over the decades, something remarkable happened. She became more than a performer. She became a mirror for millions of people who saw pieces of themselves in her pain, her perseverance, and her quiet strength. From childhood abuse to public heartbreak, from industry rejection to personal renewal, her life never followed a perfect arc. It moved in jagged lines, with sharp turns and long silences. Yet each chapter added something she never planned: wisdom. The little girl screaming silently in Pasadena eventually grew into a woman who made her voice heard across the world. And she didn't have to shout to do it. She did it through presence, through roles that mattered, through choosing her family over fame, through saying no when the world wanted her to say yes, through walking away not just from bad relationships, but from expectations that didn't fit. Today, at 78 years old, Sally doesn't chase relevance. She doesn't need it. Her career speaks for itself: 2 Oscars, 3 Emmys, a decade-spanning filmography filled with roles that challenged what Hollywood thought women could be. But even more than that, she's built a life that feels whole, a life that no longer depends on someone else's approval. The tragedy isn't in how she lived, it's in how much she had to endure to live freely, to be believed, to be respected, to be safe. She had to survive betrayal as a child, erasure as a young actress, control as a partner, and trauma as a woman. And she did it all while raising 3 sons, building a legacy, and staying rooted in values that Hollywood rarely rewards. But Sally Field didn't play by Hollywood's rules. She rewrote them. She told hard stories. She refused to be pretty and quiet when the moment called for strength and truth. And because of that, she gave permission to others to speak up, to walk away, to say, "I am enough." Her memoir, In Pieces, was more than a book. It was a reckoning, a gift to the girl she used to be. That girl had been silenced, dismissed, and harmed. But through every film, every award, every protest, every bedtime story read to her grandchildren, Sally Field gave that girl her voice back. There's a quiet power in how she lives now. No red carpets, no press tours, just Sally, weathered, wise, and still here. She's not chasing anything anymore. She's watching sunsets, watering plants, folding laundry, smiling at her grandkids, and sleeping peacefully in a home built on truth, not illusion. And maybe that's the lesson in her story. That survival isn't just about making it through. It's about turning pain into purpose, about finding beauty in scars, about knowing deep down that even when the world turns its back, you can still stand, you can still rise. Sally Field never asked to be a symbol, but in the end she became one, for resilience, for grace, and for the radical act of simply staying true.